Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar of the Dutch Platform for Information Security about Zero Trust. My name is Ewald van Meulen and I will be your host for this webinar. As you probably have noticed, Zero Trust is receiving more and more attention. For example, in February, the NSA, National Security Agency, published its guidance about embracing a Zero Trust security model. And in May, the executive order of President Biden was issued on improving the nation-state cybersecurity, mandating that executive branch federal agencies created zero-trust environments. In August, the Dutch National Cybersecurity Center, NCSC, has published its own fact sheet on how to prepare for zero-trust. So both from a legislation point of view, especially for the United States, but perhaps also in the future for the Netherlands or the EU, and from a strategic perspective, it becomes essential for security professionals like you to master the fundamentals of Zero Trust. Today's speaker, John Kindervag, is the creator of Zero Trust. For more than 10 years, he is guiding organizations towards Zero Trust with a tireless commitment. In the next hour and a half, you will gain the necessary insights firsthand from John how to start and implement your Zero Trust strategy. We are very excited to have you here with us today as our special guest. Please welcome John Kindervag.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate everything, folks, and thanks for allowing me to come in and talk to you today. I'm going to be talking to you about Zero Trust, which is kind of the only thing that I can talk about. But we're going to be talking about it. What is Zero Trust really, right? So what I'm going to do here, though, is kind of special. I plan to do something else, but it actually turns out that later on today, I'm going to be briefing the President's National Security Telecommunication Advisory Council on Zero Trust. And so I thought I'd give you a preview of what I'm going to be telling representatives of the President of the United States. I have been appointed by the President to that subcommittee. And so I'm going to be spending the next several months working with a number of people, both from the public sector, the U.S. federal government, and the private sector, big companies, to provide guidance to President Biden about what Zero Trust really is. So although a lot of people are talking about it, we saw OMB release some stuff yesterday, Office of Management and Budget. It's really NSTAC who is going to be telling the president what this really is. So I'm excited to talk to you about that. And the reason all this is really happening, bubbling up, is because President Biden on May 12th did issue an executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity. So an executive order in the United States. And I work for Onto-it, which is a Dutch company, but I am an American, even though I have Dutch heritage. But my Dutch relatives left in about 1620, so I don't know if that really counts or not. But and I am rooting for Max Verstappen, so I'm kind of in between both worlds. And so when the president sets an executive order, that has the rule of law. And it tends to drive a lot of thinking everywhere else, which is why you're seeing things like the Dutch government come in and talk about that. So this executive order said that the U.S. federal government must adopt security best practices and advance towards a zero trust model. And so this has been a significant focus of mine since May on doing some advisory on how this should be done. So today I'm going to be talking about what Zero Trust is, but I'm going to give you some history on how we got to Zero Trust, because maybe a lot of people don't know that, how I ended up doing this. And I think that that's important for you to understand the history of the internet and why we have problems with trust. So at the turn of the century, I was very frustrated by the trust model and the adaptive security algorithm because I was installing firewalls, right? So the original firewalls, if you remember them, had this thing called the adaptive security algorithm. If you've ever done a Cisco PIX firewall, you will know that they have a set of trusted interfaces and untrusted interfaces, right? And so what happened in this algorithm, the thing that caused the problem is that you had to arbitrarily assign a a trust level. It made no sense to me, but you would assign for the most trusted interface, right? Typically your internal network, that would be level 100, and 0 would be the untrusted interface, and then you could have other things like you could say that this is 50 if it's a DMZ. And so by default, you'll see here that the algorithm allowed any TCP connections that originate from the inside network. So from the higher trust level to a lower trust level, you could go outbound without any rule. And this is the problem. This is the reason we're having data breaches. This is the reason that we have ransomware attacks, because we allow things to go outbound without a rule, right? So in your firewalls or controls, you have rules that allow bad things to happen. And it's because of this. I used to fight this all the time as a practitioner and installer of firewalls, wanting to put on these outbound rules, and people would fight against me. No, don't do that. That's not how it's designed. But it needs to be that way. So this is the beginning of my frustration with this thing that we call trust. So in 2008, I joined Forrester Research, and by the fall of 2008, I did the first Zero Trust presentation at a country club in Montreal, of all things. And I did 4 additional presentations at other country clubs down the East Coast. And that was the beginning of me starting to understand that this idea of Zero Trust really resonated. And so I picked up that, and I did about 2 years of primary research where I interviewed people, talked to people, and published the first Zero Trust paper called No More Chewy Centers in 2010. This is a screenshot from the original one. It is available at Palo Alto Network's site. If you're not familiar, and I probably didn't do a good introduction here, but mostly because I just want to tell you about Zero Trust, and I'm not that important here, but I just came off a 4-year stint at Palo Alto Networks. So you're going to be seeing a lot of things that I developed at Palo Alto Networks. So I created Zero Trust at Forrester. I proved that it could be built at Palo Alto Networks. And now I'm at a Dutch company called Ontoit that's headquartered in the Netherlands, and we're moving into the U.S., and the reason that I left Palo Alto Networks and joined Ontoit is, and I've known the Ontoit folks for over 10 years, is because I wanted to do the next phase of Zero Trust, which is deliver it as a service so it could be easily consumed. So this is part of my own Zero Trust journey. Everybody, who's starting to do Zero Trust or doing it in some way is on a journey. Zero Trust is a journey. And I'm on my own journey about making Zero Trust easier and easier to do. And a lot of people are getting in the way of that, actually, because when I see what other people write about who are academics or in governments, they always make it really hard, and it's not hard. Zero Trust is really easy. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today is what I call authentic Zero Trust, the real Zero Trust that has that continuum from Forrester through Palo Alto Networks now down to Ontoit. So first thing to know about Zero Trust is it is a strategy designed to stop data breaches and other cyber attacks. So first of all, it's strategic. Second of all, it leverages design principles that have been proven to work for more than a decade. This stuff works. Ontoit has been building Zero Trust environments for a long, long time. In fact, they've done more work in that area than any other company in the world that I know of, and I pretty much know every Zero Trust environment that's ever been built. And again, that's why I came to work with them, because they really get it, or I will say we really get it now. And it uses a standard 5-step methodology. I'm going to harp on this in a little bit because it's very easy to do. There's a set of design principles and a methodology, so it's very repeatable. And then finally, it gives you demonstrable positive security outcomes. If you do this, during ransomware attacks, I get messages from people who have built zero trust environments showing me how that ransomware attack was stopped before anything bad happened, for example. So again, I can't stop attacks from happening, but I can absolutely stop them from being successful. And that's what you need to understand. You don't have to put up with this stuff anymore. You can actually win this cyber war. So let's start out with some zero trust misconceptions, right? What do you hear? And, because zero trust has become a big game of telephone, right? I don't know if you play the game telephone in the Netherlands. I didn't grow up there, right? So I don't know what you play on your schoolyard, but the game of telephone. You get on the line, one person says something, and then everybody laughs by the time it gets down to the last person, and it's not anything near what the first person said. And that's kind of what has happened with zero trust. So some zero trust misconceptions. Zero trust means making a system trusted. No, that's false. One of the ways you can tell a charlatan in zero trust is that they talk about, we're going to make this a trusted system. That means they don't understand it, right? You're seeing people talk about implicit trust. No, it's zero trust, not implicit trust. Trust is always a bad thing, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We'll hear about zero trust as identity. This was the spin that the MFA providers put on it. That's false. Zero trust consumes identity. I'll talk about that more in a minute. Then there are zero trust products. No, they're not. There are products that work well in zero trust environments, but they're just cybersecurity products. They're not zero trust products because zero trust, again, is not a product. And you'll see the NSTAC come out and say all these things. And then finally, zero trust is complicated. I hear that all the time. Oh, it sounds so complicated. Well, that's because you're listening to the wrong people. Talk to somebody who's actually done it, right? Because most of the people who are talking about it have never actually done it. So it is not complicated. There are only 9 things that you need to understand to do zero trust, and I'm going to show them to you today. So there are 2 things that I want you to take away from this. Zero trust is strategic. It's designed to resonate to the highest levels of any organization. So you can talk to your CEO, your boards of directors, whoever that is. You could explain this to, the leader of the Netherlands, and they would understand zero trust from a strategic perspective. But it's also implementable. You can do this, right? And you can do this at whatever state the technology is. Technology will always get better, and so zero trust will always get better because technology always gets better. So let's look at the strategic aspect, right? What I wanted to bring to cybersecurity when I first started this journey in 2008 was the idea of strategic engagement. And I learned about strategy from this man. His name is Colonel John Warden. He was the chief strategist for the first Gulf War. So in 1990, 1991, there was a war in Iraq called the First Gulf War. He was the strategist for it. And he is a well-known military strategist, but he adapted that to business. And that's where I started working with him. I worked with him at Texas Instruments when I was a contractor there and he was a consultant. And he documented the project that he worked on, transforming Texas Instruments, doing really what is the first ever digital transformation in this book called Winning in Fast Times. So it's my favorite business book, probably because I was there during a lot of the things that happened. But I got to spend 2 years around him, soak up all of his knowledge, and learn what strategy really was by working with Colonel Warden. So there are 4 levels of strategic engagement, and you can look at strategy from multiple different things, but in order to make it fit very well into cybersecurity, the business that we're all in, I boiled it down to four levels. So the first is called grand strategy. Grand strategy is the ultimate goal that any entity is trying to achieve. And so in order to understand the grand strategic objectives of your organization, you have to know who your grand strategic actors are. Those are the president or a prime minister of your country, or perhaps the CEO, the board of directors, the president of your company, somebody like that, the highest level people. Where as high as it can be, those are the grand strategic actors. They are going to define the ultimate goal. They might do it explicitly, they might do it implicitly, but they are going to define that. And so then the next level down is strategy. Strategy is the big idea that we're going to use to achieve that ultimate goal. And then we have tactics. Tactics are the things we use, the stuff. And one thing that Colonel Warden talked about and impressed upon me is that almost everybody confuses strategy and tactics. And this is absolutely true in the world of cybersecurity. So we do that all the time. People think they're being strategic and they're really being tactical. It is one of the biggest problems we have. And then finally, the overlooked area, operations, the way we use the things we have in order to execute on the big idea so that we can achieve the ultimate goal. And in order for a system, any system, including cybersecurity, to work, we will have to have these four things work together in concert in order to be successful. So I want you to keep this in at the top of your mind as we're going through this today, because I'm going to keep coming back through it and use this as my guideposts. So this maps perfectly to the cyber war that we're all in, and we are all in a cyber war, the same cyber war. Understand that cybersecurity is one of the only adversarial businesses in the world. The other ones are law enforcement and the military. So we have adversaries, not competitors. Your company that you work for may have competitors, but you in the cybersecurity area have adversaries. And we all share the same adversaries because we're all directly connected via the internet to the world's worst malicious actors, right? There are no suburbs on the internet. We all live in the same bad neighborhood. So I hear people all the time, well, I live here and nobody cares about me. No, you're connected to the rest of the world. It's flat. The earth is flat from a TCP/IP perspective. So we have to define a grand strategy, and the grand strategy, in my opinion, is to stop data breaches. Data fuels modern economies, right? If you don't have data, you don't have an economy. But it's this word breach that causes problems in the world of cybersecurity, because we tend to think of breaches as, oh no, somebody got into our network and they're looking around, we've been breached. No, that's the definition of an intrusion. The term breach has been redefined for us by legal and regulatory entities like GDPR or PCI. And it always means that data that is regulated or sensitive has been exfiltrated from our networks or systems into the hands of a malicious actor. This is all about stuff that went outbound. So you can start to see how this aligns with the problem of the original trust model from the adaptive security algorithm, where we didn't have rules to stop things from going outbound. So now the problem is stuff gets out and we aren't controlling what goes out. So this is where we need to put our grand strategic focus, because a data breach is the only thing that can get a CEO fired. And then we have strategy. Zero Trust is actually the world's only cybersecurity strategy. If you want to be strategic in cybersecurity, you must adopt Zero Trust. You have no other choice, because no one else has ever come out with any strategic vision around cybersecurity. It's all tactical. So then we have tactics, tools, and techniques. Those things are going to change over time. We are always trying to use the best tools and techniques in Zero Trust. So that is what has changed. The strategy and the grand strategy will never have to change. The tools and techniques and the way we use them, the platforms and the policies, those will advance and get better and better over time. So the strategy is abstracted from or decoupled from the tools, the techniques, the technologies. And that's an important thing to understand. So we'll get into grand strategy. Why do I say that? Well, let's look at the OPM data breach. I don't know if you've heard about this. 22 million people had their records stolen. This isn't 22 million random people. This is 22 million people who had top secret clearances in the U.S. federal government. This was a really big deal. This was the knock list from Mission Impossible being stolen, right? And if you've seen Mission Impossible, remember Tom Cruise hanging upside down on that funky trapeze to steal the knock list, the non-operational cover list? Well, it was stolen because they didn't have any security around it. If you read about it in the OPM Data Breach report that the U.S. Congress created, it's a fascinating story. But back in 2016, this was a watershed moment for Zero Trust, because at that point they came out and said all federal agencies should provide do zero trust. So, of course, it took 5 years for this to happen, right? This tells you how speedy the U.S. federal government is. This was a big moment for zero trust because it really gave it legitimacy, and so we started to see acceleration in the adoption of zero trust post OPM. And as a result of OPM, by the way, Catherine Archuleta, the head of that agency, was fired because of this data breach. And I could give you a long list of CEOs or leaders who were fired because of data breaches. And again, the only thing that IT can do to get the CEO fired is a data breach. They don't get fired over ransomware attacks. Ransomware attacks are disruptive, no doubt about it, but they don't get CEOs fired. They get CISOs fired. And that's the difference. Okay, so that's why we're talking at the grand strategic level. Now we'll get into zero trust as a strategy. And the way we do this is look at what you always thought was strategy but isn't. So we have expense in depth. This is the Forrester joke on defense in depth. Defense in depth is really expense in depth. You spend money you don't have on things you don't need because you don't know what you're protecting in the first place. And we even, my friend Rick Holland, who wrote this report, actually said expense in depth is not a strategy. And then we have compliance checklists. And my goodness, there's so many of them. I told Congressman Will Hurd a number of years ago that I thought that the number one problem that we have is too many compliance objectives, too many things. Every country seems to come up with a whole different one, and it just won't work because business is international, and you can't meet the needs of the Netherlands and Norway and the Philippines and the U.S. And I mean, it's just too much. We have too many of them, and every government somehow thinks that they need to weigh in on all this stuff, and they don't. We certainly don't need more legislators, more government people talking about cybersecurity because almost none of them have ever done it. They don't have any experience, so they probably shouldn't be talking about it. And then we have best of breed. You've all been told you're supposed to do best of breed. No, you're not supposed to. Don't do best of breed. It's a bad idea. These are things measured in Gartner Magic Quadrants and Forrester Waves. I refuse to do a wave at Forrester because that's not the way you do cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a system that works together, not a collection of independent parts that don't talk together and don't work together. So looking at the world from a best of breed perspective actually increases the complexity of your system, which increases risk, which is a bad thing for the overall cybersecurity posture of your organization. It's great for vendors, but it is bad for you. And then we have what I think is what most people do for their strategy. I call it hope. I said this back in 2014. The H stands for head in the sand. Pretend like nothing's wrong. And the O is obfuscate reality. Hey, it's not as bad as it is. We'll do a forensics investigation after we clean this up. And, of course, a forensics investigation is an autopsy, and autopsies are done on dead bodies. When you do things after the fact, when you focus on response instead of prevention, you are doing an autopsy. You are already dead. And then the P is point the finger at somebody else. We've seen this recently with both the FireEye and the SolarWinds thing, where both the CEOs pointed the finger at low-level people in their organization. Oh, it's their fault. And E is the employment journey. Typically, those CEOs get fired. The CEO of Sony, TalkTalk, Ashley Madison, head of OPM, CEO of Target, they all got fired because of data breaches. So that's E, the employment journey. I don't know how the CEO of SolarWinds hasn't got fired. He should get fired, but hey, I'm not on the board of directors there. So these are all tactics, and we need to move away from tactics to strategy if we want to be successful. Now let's get into zero trust. This comes out of thinking about this word trust. What is trust? Well, it is a hard thing to define, let me tell you. But I will tell you that it is a human emotion that has been injected into digital systems for absolutely no reason. So it turns out trust is actually a dangerous vulnerability. What do you do with vulnerabilities in your organization? You mitigate them, don't you? And trust must be mitigated because it is the only vulnerability that is also an exploit. Attackers don't have to create new malware to exploit trust. All they have to do is get on the network. So the only entity who gets value from trust in your organization are the malicious actors who are going to exploit that. Think about that. Ponder that for a second. Trust only benefits the malicious actors. It doesn't do anything for you. There's no trust flag in TCP. It doesn't help packets move across a network. So when we look at this broken trust model where the untrusted side of the network went to the evil internet and the trusted side went to your internal network, the things you controlled, hey, that feels like it should work, except it doesn't, because we all know that malware can cross this ephemeral trust boundary and get on the other side of your network. Well, what's malware? Malware is a group of packets. What's a packet? This is a fundamental question. What is a packet? A packet is a collection of ones or zeros represented by electrons or photons. So if as an actor, a malicious actor, I can get my little electron, and that is an ugly looking electron this morning, over to your Cat6 cable, suddenly you're going to elevate my privileges and get me attributes of trust? That makes no sense at all. And then we have malicious actors. There are two names that are so famous. I call them the Beyonce and the Madonna of cybersecurity. They're so famous they have one-word names. Snowden, Manning. They were trusted users on trusted devices. They had the right antivirus, the right anti-malware, the right patch level. They had robust identity systems, powerful multi-factor authentications systems, but nobody looked at their packets post-authentication. And that's why they were able to do this. They exploited the trust model. And this is how we know that multi-factor authentication and identity are consumed within zero trust, but not equivalent to zero trust. So we're just going to eliminate trust. Get rid of trust. It's always bad. It's always a four-letter word. Don't, in your own mind, whenever you want to say the word trust, don't say it. In the world of the digital world, even in the human world, is problematic, and that's a discussion for a different day. But in the digital world, there's no reason for it. But people just want to hold on to this silly word called trust. Well, no, don't. Now, I'm often accused of saying that people aren't trustworthy, and I'm not saying that. I am saying something much, much more profound. I am saying people are not packets. Remember, the only thing that's ever on a network is a packet. It is the anthropomorphization of the network that's killing us. The idea that John is on the network. Well, I am not on the network. I'm in my house in Dallas, Texas. I have not shrunken down into a subatomic particle to be sent over the internet to the Microsoft Teams server so that it can appear on your screen right now. That has never happened in the world. No person has ever been on a network. Even in the movies, it rarely happens. Maybe Tron, Lawnmower Man. But in the Matrix, they still got to plug in. So get rid of this idea of trust, and it will free you up. It will free you up to build environments that you can actually secure. The next thing we look at is the implementability of zero trust. Zero trust is implementable. Sorry. Haven't finished my first cup of coffee yet. So when we look at the tactics, the tools and techniques, we can see that there's 4 design principles. The first thing we're going to do is focus on the business outcomes. This is how we align with the grand strategic vision. Grand strategy is up here, so we need to align to that. If you don't know what your business is trying to achieve, you can never be successful in cybersecurity. Technology will not make you successful in cybersecurity. Next, you design from the inside out instead of the outside in. We all learned to design networks from the outside in. We started at the edge and moved inwards and never actually understood what we were protecting. And then from there, we need to determine who or what needs to have access, need to know, least privilege. This is why we have problems. We let too many people have access to too much data in this world. And so you want to really restrict who has access on a need-to-know basis. Ask the question, does any certain person or device need to have access to this resource in order to get their job done? That's the question. Do they need to have access? And then finally, we inspect and log all the traffic all the way up at layer 7. We must do this at layer 7. Layer 3, layer 4, not good enough. Every attacker knows how to bypass this. So once we can do this, we can turn this into a layer 7 policy statement. I just need layer 7 controls to enforce that policy. And so ultimately, Zero Trust is a policy statement, right? It's not a technology. It's a strategy that's instantiated in policy. Now, the best way to show you how this works is to look at how the U.S. Secret Service protects the President of the United States. So they know three things about the President. They know who the President is. They don't do presidential discovery projects. They know where the President is, and they know who should have access to the President at any given time. So this is an image from President Barack Obama's 2009 inauguration parade. And you can see on this date, January 20th, 2009, there was a perimeter. But let's look at these uniformed Secret Service agents. They have their hands in the pockets. They got these big woolly hats on. Why? Because it's cold outside. And they know they're not really doing any security. So they're just standing there. They're not really useful. They're just there to intimidate. No, the real protection is being done down at the bottom of the screen at what's called the protect surface. This is the fundamental concept tactically of Zero Trust. If you understand the idea of protect surfaces, you will understand Zero Trust. So I can take the overall attack surface, shrink it down orders of magnitude to something very, very small and easily known called a protect surface. So on this day, there were 4 people in the protect surface, the President, his wife, and his 2 children. That's it. If at the end of the day, those 4 people who were left alive, then the Secret Service did their job. No one else mattered in the entire world to the Secret Service except those 4 people, because they are the protect surface. Now, because the Secret Service knows what they need to protect, they can do something really amazing. They can move their controls in adjacent to the protect surface. Get those controls in as close as possible. We don't do that in cybersecurity. We put our controls out here on the perimeter or maybe an endpoint, which are a long way from what we're actually trying to protect. And this creates a secondary attack surface for our attackers. This is where we talk about dwell time. If you look at dwell time, the attackers have been in the environment for a long period of time, days, weeks, months, years. Why? Because the controls are in the wrong place. They're out at the edge. They're not near the thing we're trying to protect. So we need to move the controls in adjacent to the protect surface so we can define a micro perimeter in policy. There's a policy here right now that says only these 2 individuals can transit outbound. So very simple policy. And no one can come inbound. There are 0 people who can come inbound in the micro perimeter. If you've ever been, probably none of you have been around a Secret Service detail, but these people here, they are very intense, and they care about one thing: protecting this protect surface, right? And so if we look at this Secret Service agent here, he does not have his hands in his pockets. He does not have a hat on. His coat isn't buttoned. Why? Because he has a control underneath his jacket where he's going to enforce this deny all policy. Now, from there, the Secret Service doesn't stop there, though. They continuously monitor and update in real time. So they might look out in the audience and see, oh, this guy here looks sketchy. Let's send out a threat intelligence message to the controls to keep an eye out on him. And then they might get an update and say, hey, we need to change the inbound policy because somebody needs to come in and talk to the President. So they can do that dynamically. So this is a Zero Trust model of executive protection. This is how you protect anything, whether it is data, assets, or the President of the United States. It does not matter. Now, where do you start your journey? Well, you start it with the first step. This is the Fjord Stairs in Lysenfjord in Norway, near where my grandfather was born. And so I went, I had some business there, so I went out and looked at this with my cousin, and it really inspired me because this is a mountain. You can't really see the mountain here, but this mountain has the world's longest set of wooden steps. There's 4,444 steps, and people from all over the world come to this place to climb these steps. It's a big deal, apparently, if you're a step climber. I don't know. But back at the turn of the 20th century, they hollowed out this mountain to build a hydroelectric plant. And so every morning, guys came, and they climbed these steps carrying 50-kilogram bags of concrete. And as I was standing down here looking up this, and I got about here, and I went, well, that's as far as I'm going, right? This is not on my bucket list, because I think I would kick the bucket if I climbed all 4,444 steps. But imagine every day that's your job, to carry big, heavy loads up this. How do you do that? Well, you focus on the first step, and then you do the second step, and then you do the third step, and then you do the fourth step, and that's how you do zero trust. So I created a 5-step methodology at Forrester. I've continued it through Palo Alto Networks, and I use it today in my work at Onto It, where we start with defining the protect surface. What are we going to protect? I'm on calls all the time where people are talking about, where do I put this widget, this technology, and I'll ask, what are you trying to protect? And they go, I don't know, never thought about that. Because we're so focused on the technology. Focus on the protect surface. The technology will figure itself out later once you know what you're going to protect. So what should you protect? Well, I created a simple acronym to help you know what goes into protect surfaces. So this is called a DAS element. DAS is a little acronym to help you easily remember what you need to protect. It stands for data, any data that is sensitive, applications, typically applications that use sensitive data. Then we have assets, could be IT asset, OT asset, IoT asset, IMOT asset, IIoT asset, whatever alphabet soup we're talking about at any given time. They can all be secured in the same way. And then we have services we need to protect. NTP, DNS, DHCP, Active Directory, things that are so fundamentally important to our business that if they go down, everything goes down. They're very fragile and typically not well protected. So what you do very simply is you take a single DAS element and put it into a single protect surface. That's a step. And so you're doing this one protect surface at a time, one DAS element at a time. Once you've figured out what you need to protect, what DAS element, we might say that it's going to be PCI for credit card data. Okay, great. So now we've decided our DAS element. Now we need to look at that system and map the transaction flows of the system that uses PCI data. After we've done that, we will then be able to determine the correct architecture to control that at the appropriate way. So most people start with architecture, and everybody wants the reference architecture for zero trust so they can just substitute it. No, you can't do that. You have to know what you're protecting before you know what controls need to be there. And then after that, we create the policy. Remember, I said zero trust is ultimately a layer 7 policy, and I'll talk a little bit more detail about that in a moment. And then finally, we monitor and maintain the environment so that we take all of the things we learn, we re-inject it back into the system. That's what I'm doing at Onto It, is focusing on all 5 of these, but especially step 5, so that we can create what's known as an anti-fragile system. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of FRAGILE, an anti-fragile system. If you haven't read the book Anti-Fragile by Taleb, you need to. He gave me the language to talk about what I've been trying to do. This is a system that as it is under load, as we get more data about it, we can refine it and make it stronger and stronger over time so that dynamically it gets better and better. It is not static, it is anti-fragile. And that is magic, folks. That is something that will really help you over the long period of time. Now, Zero Trust defines network segmentation. So a lot of you are doing that. The first thing you need to understand if you're going to segment a network is what are you trying to protect? Again, this is a cardholder data network, so PCI is our DAS element that we're going to protect. This tells us why we are segmenting. The only reason to segment a network is to protect something. There is no other reason to do it. So once we do that, we're going to connect a segmentation gateway to the protect surface to define a micro perimeter so that we can enforce the segmentation at layer 7 policy. A segmentation gateway is a gateway that segments networks layers 2 through 7 based upon users, applications, or data. This is typically next generation firewall technology when a next generation firewall is used in a zero trust environment, it is called a segmentation gateway. That can be a physical segmentation gateway, or it can be a virtual segmentation gateway. It doesn't matter what the environment is, it functions the same way. And so once we add centralized management to it, this becomes the really the reference architecture for zero trust. And then we're just going to build it out one protect surface at a time so that this can be done incrementally, iteratively, and non-disruptively. Now, this is non-disruptive because we augment your existing environment with a zero trust environment. So we build the zero trust environment off to the side. Again, over here is the cardholder data environment. This is the PCI, is the DAS element. We have a 3-tiered architecture here. Each one of those ends up having a micro perimeter. Also, I have the wireless network here because PCI requires that the wireless network be segmented off. And so this is where we're going to define policy inside of here. And again, it's going to go in, all the telemetry is going to go into our OXO platform so that we can control that and prevent bad things from happening. So once we've built that, we're going to connect it to your existing environment. And then over time, we are going to grab other data types, other assets, so that we can automatically, organically increase the size of our zero trust environment and decrease the size of our legacy environment. Now, this works in any environment. It works in public and private clouds as well as on-premise or on endpoints. So basically, a public and a private cloud are the same thing. They're just a hypervisor stack. And so what we want to do is insert a segmentation gateway virtually, a virtual segmentation gateway into the hypervisor stack so that we can add layer 7 policy, layer 7 controls at the virtual switch. And this means that we can enforce policy as traffic is moving up towards the hypervisor where the protect surface is contained. And so once you've done that, then you can start to control this with centralized management, and all of your segmentation gateways, whether they are physical or virtual, will have centralized management applied to them. And so we can do all kinds of different things. We can have containerized versions of this. We can have endpoint controls in here. This is a very Palo-centric version of it, but there's other ways to do it. And so from there, we can deploy the same thing in public clouds as well as private clouds. They all work the same way. The only difference between a public and private cloud is you don't see telemetry on the back end, so you'll need some sort of API-based control or some sort of agent on the back end to get telemetry on what's happening as traffic moves through that cloud. So typically you'll grab that through the cloud API. A couple other ways to do it, but I would suggest looking at those API-based controls. Now, we get into the operations, the platform, and the policies. So this is the key here, right? This is an image of the Bomba, the analog computer Alan Turing was building to defeat the Nazi Enigma code. If you've seen the movie Imitation Game, that really hit me hard. When I watched that, it just had so many analogs to what we're trying to do in cybersecurity. In fact, the character of Alan Turing says something that just blew me away. He said, what if only a machine can defeat another machine? And that's what we need to do. We have to build machines to defeat another machine. That's what we're doing at Onto It. That's why I came to Onto It. We are building the machine to defeat the machine. So we're doing that with our OXO platform. So if you want a demo of that, go to this link here, ontoit.net/OXO demo. If you want a signed book from our CISO, Yuri Bobert, send him an email. Here's his email address down here. And so we have a lot of resources there. And Yuri is a great guy. I'm sure most of you know him. I mean, you know, there's not that many people in the Netherlands, right? So everybody must know Yuri. Don't you all know each other? I don't know. This is the American point of view when you go, hey, you're from the Netherlands. Oh, do you know my friend Yuri or my friend Marcel? Oh, no, I don't. That surprises us because we think of it as so small. So, but But how do we write policy? This is the key, right? So this is what's called the Kippling Method. So the Kippling Method it was inspired by Rudyard Kipling. He gave us the idea of who, what, when, where, why, and how. And so this is how you can write policy in an easy to understand, easy to write, easy to read, and easy to audit manner. So we can write rules whether they're going to the cloud or on-premise using this idea of who, what, when, where, why, and how. Who should have access to a resource? We can then define an identifier at layer 7 for this to replace source IP address, and then add any authentication type we want to. This is what other people are saying zero trust is, just a who statement. Then we can define an application ID. So applications again need to exist at layer 7. This is where we're replacing port and protocol to define the what statement. So we can see this happening in this rule for Salesforce. The what statement is the Salesforce application. You can access the Salesforce application if you're in the sales user ID. If you are, that might be the OUs of salespeople or sales managers or sales admins. Add the right authentication type, and then you can access Salesforce. You can access a localized version of it if you need to, but you need to meet a certain how statement, a certain set of criteria. So you wouldn't turn on URL filtering because this rule will never surf the public internet, even if it traverses the public internet. You would decrypt it. You would turn on threat protection to make sure that there's no, this is an IPS type of functionality. You'd turn on sandboxing, and you'd probably turn on some DLP. If all those things are true, then you will allow it. Zero trust is a set of very granular allow rules. Remember, all bad things happen inside of an allow rule. All bad things happen inside of an allow rule. If you suffer a data breach or have a negative security event, you have a rule in your environment someplace that allowed it to happen. It just didn't accidentally happen. You allowed it to happen. Now, that may be a hard pill for some people to swallow, but it is true. So, where do you start? This is where the zero trust learning curve comes into play, where we look at the sensitivity or criticality of a protect surface over the time on the zero trust journey, and we look at this curve on a per protect surface basis. And just as a quick reminder, each protect surface contains a single DAS element. So what we're going to do is early on, we're going to focus on something that is low sensitivity called a learning protect surface. You need a safe place to learn how to do this. Once you've done that, then you will focus on practice protect surfaces. They have a little bit more sensitivity, but still not mission critical. So you get to zero trust the same way you get to Carnegie Hall. Practice, practice, practice. And so once you understand this and you have confidence in your ability to deploy these, and this happens early on in your zero trust journey, right? Then you're going to focus on your keys to the kingdom, your high value assets, whatever those things are. And I used to tell people start here. I don't say that anymore because they're so fragile, things can break. And I don't want to see that happen in your organization. So make sure you have some experience doing this in some way before you start handling those big keys to the kingdom. And then once you've done that, then you can focus on stuff that's less important. And every organization gets to define the threshold, and they say, hey, this stuff here, not important enough. Shouldn't go into a zero trust environment. Not everything is important enough to go zero trust. Zero trust is not binary. It's a journey. You will probably never have everything in a full zero trust network. I've heard people complain, there are no complete zero trust networks. No, there's not, and there's not supposed to be. That's a complete misunderstanding of what we're trying to do. And then finally, you can measure it by having a maturity model. So this maturity model is tied to each of the 5 steps. So you can go in here and score this out. So you can say, oh, I'm here, 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 and I want to get to here. And so this is how I go to the executive team to get budget, because I can show them that I'm not mature enough and I need to have more resources. This, of course, is tracked in our OXO portal. So I want to spend the last however much time answering any questions that I can, any comments, criticisms. You can, I pretty much heard everything, so you can't offend me here. But let me know what you think, and if you have any questions, throw them into, I guess, the chat box. That's how we're doing it today, right?
Thanks, Jan, for your great presentation. Indeed, I see lots of questions starting and coming in. Let's see the first question. The first question was about the crown jewels, and you already mentioned that nowadays you take a different approach. The question is it wise to determine the crown jewels during the inventory of DAS to get insight of the protect service? That was from Adri, a question.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to, as you're inventorying all these things, you want to know which are the crown jewels. You want to understand how important they are and how much effort you want to put into them. It's just in the deployment process, I highly recommend starting with something easy, just so you learn how to do it, right? I mean, I was watching the Olympics, right? Well, let's just take Max driving the car. I went to a Grand Prix race a couple of years ago in Austin, Texas. If I was going to become a Grand Prix driver, I'm not going to go from never driving a race car to getting into the Aston Martin Formula One car and racing against Max Verstappen. I'm not going to do that. That's going to fail, right? So I need to learn. I need to go to a training center, and then I need to practice and go through a process so that I eventually get good enough that I can race Max Verstappen, right? But my first time in a Formula One car should not be at a Grand Prix race against Max Verstappen. That would not turn out well for me. I would die.
Certainly against him. The next question is from Maurice. He's wondering that if we really need a layer 7 next generation firewall device, then he's wondering how would we able to implement Zero Trust whilst using the Microsoft cloud or perhaps any other cloud. But how do you see the relation to the cloud versus such firewalling devices?
Well, remember that you can insert layer 7 firewalls into those clouds. Right. So that's how you want to do it. The native controls, a stateless layer 3 ACL, is the laughingstock of the pen testing and the hacker community, right? Mm-hmm. Every attacker knows how to bypass those controls. They don't stop anybody. They may stop you or some of your people, but it doesn't stop the malicious actors. And that's who we have to worry about. That's why it isn't good enough, right? I was talking to one of the old school pen testers, hacker dudes from the turn of the century, and he said, man, it feels like we're back in 1998, 1999, where everybody thinks that what is essentially an ACL on a router is good enough. These things don't even keep state. So, not good enough. Sorry. Just not, because the attackers know how to bypass it, right? Would you put a lock on your door that you know that any burglar could easily pick? You want a lock that you think is at least going to make it a little bit hard for them to get in, right?
Right. Well, talking about old school and logs, it was a remark of one of the others that the Zero Trust model looks a little bit like the old deny all principle. What can you tell about that? How does it differ from the old school denial?
Well, there is a deny all principle, right? There's a deny all rule, and I don't know that there was ever an old school deny all principle because people didn't do denials. It was more likely that they did an any allow. I can't tell you how many times I've been at a place where I found an any allow rule somewhere in the firewall. And I can tell you there's a big bank that I know of because I talked to the CISO, And the first rule in his firewall when he got there was any allow. So he had people going through all kinds of gyrations to do change management on a firewall that actually didn't do any firewalling because the first rule was any allow. So yeah, deny all is just a tactic that you put in, but zero trust is more than just having a deny all rule. There should be a fundamental deny all in it. If there's not a rule, nothing happens. If there's not a positive allow rule, nothing should happen.
All right. Well, the next one is not so much a question, but more a remark, and I'm sure you have an opinion about that. The remark is that the Maurice says that his conclusion for now is that at this moment we use all SOC and SIEM services, especially from external companies, managed services, which are based on a feeling of trust, but mostly money eating and not about trust at all. Do you recognize something from that in the field, or what is your experience?
Well, I mean, in general, I don't like managed services. I never thought I would join a managed service company because they're typically not very effective. But the company that I joined does it so much differently than everybody else that it is effective, and it's provably effective. And when I looked at it, I went, wow, this is a game changer. So yeah, the traditional SOC SIM, do as little as possible to meet the SLA. Yeah, that's not very effective. But I joined onto it because there's a whole different paradigm there. And so if you want to see that paradigm, go over here to the demo and get a demo, right, and see how different it is.
All right, thanks. Many questions coming in. Great to see. Thanks for that, all people. The next one I really like, also from Adri, and he asks, are there differences with regard to implementation if availability of even integrity are more of a concern than the confidentiality of your company's data?
So in reality, there should never be a time when you don't want full confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That all those three things are supposed to be, an equilateral triangle, CIA. But if you only care about availability, right, integrity, I mean, isn't even a problem anymore. Then the C stands for compromise, right? It's not confidentiality anymore. It's compromise. If all you care about is availability, you're going to get compromised. So yeah, these things that we don't have to in the modern world. This is from the 20th century, right? It's not even relevant anymore. But if all you care about is availability, then you're going to get compromised, and then you're going to lose your job. So you want to keep your job. We want availability all the time, but we want really good proactive security all the time. And those two things are not in conflict to each other anymore.
Yeah. Okay. Looking at some questions right now. This one is a little bit related to the approach you draw in the graph. It's from I don't know his first name, but how would you advise to start promoting or convincing zero trust within an organization that is still in a traditionally trusted model and always looking at compliance, for instance, ISO 27001 or so? How can one start promoting and convincing and spreading the word?
Yeah, try to have the discussions with the grand strategic actors in your organization. They get it, right? And so trust is, I mean, when you start talking about this, try to ask somebody to define trust. You can't even define it, right? Try to define it. It's a really hard thing to define. And but then ask, why do we need trust in order to make a packet flow over a network. And then when you start putting it in those terms, see, people are just tied into the past. And
Right.
the attackers aren't. This is all about stopping attackers. And so attackers, they want you to have the trust model. For all I know, the big nation states are the people fighting the zero trust model. For all that, maybe they're the people doing all of the propaganda about zero trust is bad. I don't know, but
Yeah.
It's only bad for the people who want to compromise your environment. It doesn't actually have any negative effect to your organization. In fact, it's transparent to almost all users. Can you imagine a scenario when suddenly Edward Snowden is cut off from stealing something? Is he going to go to the help desk and say, hey, I was in the middle. I had this SSH tunnel set up where I was stealing top secret information that I'm going to give to WikiLeaks, and you cut that off? Can you give me the rights to set up that SSH tunnel again? Is he going to do that? No. He's going to go, oh, crap. So, it doesn't affect anybody negatively. Right? The only reason people don't want to do it is because that's not the way we've always done it. But the way you've always done it hasn't been working.
Right. And speaking of end users, so not the business per se itself, but the end users. How important is it, in your opinion, to get those end users involved? Because it might have some impact, like you mentioned, reaching out for the help desk, requesting access again, or what is your experience?
The end users typically don't care, right?
Okay.
They typically don't, as long as they get access to the resources that they need to do their job, they typically don't care. Right. And if somehow that access is cut off, they just open up a ticket and then somebody makes the decision, yes, you are supposed to have access to that. But it's quite common for people to lose their jobs because they just started poking around and they got access to something they weren't supposed to, and that gets flagged, and suddenly they violated policy and they get fired. So now, if you present it in the right way, we're going to keep you from accidentally doing something that would get you fired. That's how I approach it with those people. Okay.
Another question is about identity, and I heard you already mention a little bit about identity. One of Jeroen asks, so what's the big difference with, for instance, Beyond Corp, which focuses mostly on identity and context? I've seen you touch this a little bit in the presentation, but I'm curious if the concepts overlap.
Well, they overlap in the terms of Beyond Corp just used the word zero trust.
Right.
But identity is important and we consume it. But they are hyper-focused on it. They think identity solves everything, and it doesn't. Because identities, first of all, identity is an assertion. It's not a real thing, right? John is not on the network, so it's not real. My asserted identity is logged. There's an assertion that John is the user of a machine that's generating packets.
Right.
But that may or may not be a true statement. Secondly, identity is always fungible. There's ways to get around every identity system in the world, and attackers know how to do it. And I don't care what it is. Biometrics, there's ways to get around biometrics, right? There's ways to get around everything. And then identity has entropy. So it degrades over time. So you're constantly trying to revalidate it. So we want highly validated identities that we can consume in policy. That's the difference. It's something that we use in policy, but not the be-all, end-all. And I can prove that with two words: Snowden, Manning. I've just proved that identity isn't zero trust. And but.
And what exactly do you mean by it fades over time for identities?
So there's entropy in the token that is being exchanged, and so actually, as it moves around, it sort of degrades. I'm not the right person to get into the math related to that, but there's a whole mathematical concept around the entropy of identity, And so you constantly need to revalidate it at various times. And so you send out another message, or you have to query something, and because you don't know when it might get compromised too, right? So along any part of the chain, it could get compromised. And I've watched log files where I've watched log files of attackers where they're stealing data, and you can see the message, the MFA has been revalidated, right? So they're so underneath all of that that it doesn't really matter. And so we want to revalidate it, but we want to be looking at the usage of the traffic to make sure it's behaving in the correct way and meeting policy. So if we have an identity that doesn't have policy attached to it, then it can't do anything. So if somebody has so for example, if there's somebody is phished and their identity is stolen, and they want to use that to do an attack, a malware attack that's going to be ransomware. Well, there's not a rule that allows that particular identity to contact an unknown server on the public internet, which would be the command and control center server. So you've now just killed the ransomware attack because it can't contact command and control. So this is why it's so important to tie the identity to a proactive rule.
Okay. Thanks. Another question, and questions are still coming in, so keep going so we can select the best question for today at the end. One question is about privileges and entitlements. It's from Ritesh. His question is, would access permission itself, for example, admin privileges or roles, qualify for being a DAS element?
Typically not. They're not typical. Well, the server itself, the technology that issues that would be a DAS element, but the role itself typically isn't a DAS element because it's not the thing that's being referenced. I mean, in some ways it could be compromised, right? But it's compromised for the purpose of getting to something else. And so that's typically how you think of it, right? I mean, if you want to think of it that way, there's no hard and fast rules in Zero Trust. There's guidelines and models and things that are repeatable processes. But it doesn't really serve you to think of it that way. You think of that accessing something else that has value to the attacker, because the attacker typically wants to make money. So you're asking, how do they monetize the attack? Now, that's not quite 100% true all the time, because that they might want to steal intellectual property, for example, if they're a nation state, although that's a long-term goal of monetization. Or they might just want to disrupt you for some reason, which is not a monetization attack, but a disruption attack. And it might be to, but there's some other malicious purpose behind it. Like if you're going to war with another country, you're going to try to attack all of their command and control, their communications. And so that's another game. But most of the people in this won't, be involved in that, hopefully.
Thanks. The next one is a very interesting one, I think, because it's basically 3 questions in one. It's from Arnoud. He asks, how can we implement a zero trust model in a multiplier supplier cloud environment in a reasonable time frame and being a small organization? So,
it's fairly easy to deploy the technologies into these clouds, right? Because we have automation technologies now. So you can deploy a virtual segmentation gateway into a public cloud using something like Terraform in minutes.
Okay.
So it's more figuring out the policy, figuring out the protect surfaces that take longer. The deployment of the technology is highly automated these days. I've watched people do it in just a few minutes. So it's pretty easy.
it's also more, if I understand well, about the first step that you showed in the 5 steps, that you really have to think about what is important for your business, for your organization, and then design from the inside out the policies that you want to achieve.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The next one is, I think, also a very interesting question. It's from Rob. He asks, how does corporate culture influence a successful zero trust model implementation?
So what you want to do is get your leadership to incentivize everybody to do it. And that's where I've had the most success.
Yeah.
So I give versions of this presentation to people who are, on boards of directors, CEOs, those kinds of things. The average security engineer probably doesn't want to do this because it's going to make them do a little bit more work. Yeah. And let's face it, no one wants to do more work, right? So yeah, but if your boss's boss says we're going to do it, then you're more likely to do it. So you want to get as high up in the stack as you can to incentivize this kind of thing. And of course, as governmental entities and other things come out with these policy statements or guidances or rules, that's going to change the incentive structure as well.
Yeah, and these policies, of course, have been enforced in the USA by the executive order of President Biden. Do you expect that also to happen in some European countries, or what is your feeling about that?
Well, I mean, there's guidance being, the UK has guidance, the Dutch came out with their guidance.
Yeah.
I got a copy of it last week. Of course, I don't read Dutch, so I don't know what it says, but the Norwegians came out with guidance, the Philippines came out with guidance. Everybody's going to be having their own sets of guidance. The problem for international organizations is, a lot of these things don't agree. So that's where I'm trying to come in, and because I'm the authoritative source of zero trust. I created it, so I know best what it is, and I've tried to make it simpler than other people are trying to make it.
Yeah. Okay. Another question from one of our attendees. He says, thanks for answering my last question, John. A follow-up question. You said they should know traditional ways don't work anymore, but what if the organization focusing on compliance never had any serious compromises, and traditionally speaking, the current compliance-driven approach works? What can be done then to still convince them for zero trust? Oh, that's Stefan who asked this. Stefan, your question. Yeah.
So when you say, well, they've never had a compromise, how would they know? Yeah. Right? Because almost no data breaches are discovered by the breach party. If you look at, you remember there was a company called Nortel that used to exist. They're out of business now. Why? Because they were hacked out of business. A nation state stole all their intellectual property. They were in there for 20 years and no one knew. It's very common. You look at some of these things, Citrix, I think they were in there for 10 years and no one knew. So how do you know whether you're compromised or not? Because, you think, well, my network's up and running. I had a client who ultimately they had a data breach done by a Russian cyber criminal gang. And the Russians were having trouble exfilling the data, not because there were controls in place to stop the exfil, but just because the network was really bad. So the Russians went in and reconfigured all the routers, switches, and firewalls to make it work better, right? Yeah. And so suddenly everybody's going, hey, Joe Bob, wow, we've never, everything is so fast. We've never been able to get to Facebook faster than we can now. You are doing great, right? Yeah. Because, of course, how quickly you can get to Facebook is the great arbiter of how well your network is performing. And then months later, they found out when the FBI came and said, "Hey, how come all your intellectual property was found on this Russian server?" And then they go, "Well, no, the network was always up and running." Well, the network up and running may be evidence of a compromise, right? Yeah. So how would you know? You
It might be the case that we have a network glitch, John. I'm not sure he still connected. No, I don't think. You're back again. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it just went whoop. That was probably the NSA trying to shut me down.
I saw some people make the same remarks over here also. We still have about 10 minutes. Let's look at the last questions to see if there are any winners in there. Adri again is asking, can a correctly planned zero trust implementation at the end turn out to be much cheaper than current scattered projects to implement all kind of security approaches and tools? What are the experience in this area within, for instance, your company onto IT?
So typically we see a significant reduction in capital expenditures because of you're consolidating a lot of technologies that are overlapping. Like I had one customer in Papua New Guinea who had 21 different firewalls from 6 different manufacturers, thinking that they had defense in depth, and really they had something that was unmanageable, and so they saved a ton of money that way. Additionally, they're another great example of consolidating to one platform and focusing on policy, not product. Suddenly they had something that was manageable by fewer people, so there's reduction in operational expenses. And then there's a third significant expense reduction, which is in the cost of auditing and compliance. Auditors tend to love zero trust environments because, first of all, they can understand them. They don't understand traditional IT environments because they're too messy. They understand what's being protected. The idea of protect surface helps them focus on what should fall under compliance. A lot of compliance is built into zero trust. Remember, I'm a former QSA, right? So I learned about compliance firsthand doing it in the real world. And then a lot of the things in an auditor's checklist are just not applicable to a zero trust environment. They're applicable to an old school 20th century hierarchical legacy network, right?
Can you give an example of that?
Oh, well, sure. Say, trying to think of one that comes to mind because I wasn't ready for that question. Well, so, for example, because of how you do segmentation, typically the wireless networks are automatically segmented off from the wired networks to meet PCI requirement, the one dot something, right? So a lot of that kind of stuff is pretty easy. Just the fact that the traffic is being inspected and looked at, and you have access to that is a good example. Because remember, ISO is really old, right? I mean, again, it's back from the 20th century. I was once given a speech in Hong Kong, and the guy before me was the guy who created BS 779, which became ISO 27K, and his speech was about how you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't do ISO 27K because it was designed 20 years before that, and it's really not applicable. But we still hold on to all of these old school ideas that may or may not be applicable anymore. Things like the CIA model, right? Why would you hold on to that? I mean, it didn't make a difference in the first place. It didn't make anything more secure. Certainly doesn't help now. But I still see people talking about it. So I don't know.
Yeah. I have two questions left at the moment, one of Adri and one of Jeroen, I see. So I think that would be great to end this webinar of today. The first one of Adri is, what are your experiences with using configuration management and, for instance, CMDB registration with regards to updating your DAS landscape or domain?
Oh, yeah, it's really important to have an inventory if you can, right? I mean, most people don't know what they have. So when you come into a big company and you say, what do we need to protect? Everybody goes, I don't know, right? So yeah, you need that, and it's easier than ever to get that information, especially from layer 7 controls. You're starting to see a lot more things that are focused on IoT security and giving insight into that can give insight into anything that has a TCP stack. So it's becoming easier and easier to do that. So yes, that is super important. The more information you can have, the easier it becomes.
Is it a driver to update or renew or improve your CMDB environment? I think that's lying behind that question. Do you see that happen in reality?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think we want to see that happen. Yeah. You know, but because it's still kind of hard and kind of a manual process for a lot of companies, they don't do it. In fact, one of my colleagues at Forrester, a good friend of mine, Glenn O'Donnell, actually wrote the book on CMDB. So the actual book on CMDB was written by him, and you know he makes a great case on why it's so important, but he also talks about how people think it's too hard. So we're starting to see, because we can get layer 7 visibility. Now you can, the other benefit of layer 7 visibility is not just protection, but it's visibility into things like those CMDB elements.
Okay, great. The last question of today is of Jeroen. He asked, John, moving from traditional perimeter security to zero trust in the past decade, what are your thoughts on the next decade for security? Any new concepts?
Oh, I think there'll be new technologies.
Right.
You know, it's hard to say, right? Because right now we don't need that. I need people to adopt zero trust more than something else to create more noise in the marketplace. The technologies need to get better, need to get more automated, need to get more proactive and preventive. And we need to not be afraid of stopping things. We still have this issue where people are afraid of false positives.
Right.
You should never be afraid of a false positive. What's the big deal? You stop something, you got to let it through again. But you want to stop the bad stuff. And if you're so afraid of stopping false positives, you will allow a lot of bad stuff to come into your environment because you're afraid of stopping a little bit of good stuff. And so that just doesn't make any sense. So get over that fear. And if somebody says, well, you stopped my email while you were checking it for spam, tough. That's the world we live in, right? This is how technology works. And you're gonna have some false positives occasionally. No big deal. I mean, it's not going to take any system down. So it's not the way it was 20 years ago when we only had IDSs that had unidirectional traffic flow and all that stuff. So it's crazy that we still focus on that. And so it's a very interesting world that we live in, where people are still very, very afraid of stopping bad stuff. So don't be afraid of that. That would be a message that I would have.
I think that's a great message also to end your presentation, and maybe it's also a good summary of what you are trying to send out to all people involved, to our security community. So thank you for that. Don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid. And I want to thank everybody for letting me come on. Sure. Don't forget to go to ontoit.net, request a demo, send an email to Yuri. He'll send you a book. I think we're gonna look at these questions. He's going to give away a free training certification course, and come out and visit us in Zaltbommel. How many people in the audience have ever been to Zaltbommel? That's just what I'm curious about, because I drove through it once back before our office was there, but Zaltbommel. Yeah, see, there we go. They're raising their hands. They've been to Zaltbommel. So cool. So if you're in Zaltbommel, stop by, get a SOC tour, say hi to Yuri and the whole team over there, and look forward to seeing you in the Netherlands whenever this dang coronavirus thing goes away.
Thank you, John, for joining us today and for your presentation, and we'll certainly visit Zaltbommel.
Okay.
Okay. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.